We don't even have the transfigured gem information yet, and things are already changing at a drastic pace. Even before the league was announced, there was a lot of tech that was being implemented for bow builds, and with some of the new changes, we've got even more to contend with. Bow builds on League Start are changing in 3 pretty massive ways in Affliction League. And starting with number 1, ballistas are no longer mandatory. Now, what do I mean by ballistas are no longer mandatory? So typically on a League Start, you're most likely going to be using something like Siege Ballista. However, as you get later in, you're going to be using these artillery ballistas. Most of the time, you'll be using these artillery ballistas with focus ballista towards the beginning of the endgame. And the whole idea behind this is because artillery ballista does a lot of damage and it hits a lot of time, significant damage for single target. These have kind of been the staple for quite some time. However, here in the last couple of leagues, Mana-Forged Arrows has actually been getting some pretty big popularity. It started out, pretty underwhelming. People are like, oh, there's a couple cool things that you could do with this, and then almost immediately people started to realize how strong this ability was. So the whole idea here is that using Storm Rain as well as Blast Rain early on in the game, linked with Mana-Forged Arrows, as well as Life Tap support, you can get some pretty significant single target damage going without having to deal with putting down any extra ballistas or pressing any extra buttons. It just happens every single time you cast. Well, there is a short cooldown. The way that this works is that Mana-Forged Arrows typically procs after you spend a certain amount of mana on other abilities. However, if we link Life Tap to this, it makes the mana cost of this ability 0, meaning every single time we shoot an ability, as long as the cooldown of Mana-Forged Arrows is up, we are going to get whatever Mana-Forged Arrows that we have linked with it. Now this is going to eat into your life pool, however, bow league starters tend to have quite a bit of recovery through leech and other means early on, so it shouldn't be too big of a deal. However, this makes for a significantly smoother playstyle where you can still get single target damage going from all of these beams on the Storm Rains, as well as Blast Rain early on, without having to deal with totems or anything else as you progress into the late game. This change alone is super big, at least for me when it comes to a bow league starter, because I personally really don't like having to deal with ballistas. I stay away from ballista-based builds in general, although there are some pretty significant, bonuses to playing ballistas. If I don't have to, if I can just press one button and just go, I'm going to choose the one button build so that I can focus on everything else and turn my brain off. Now, talking about the second way that bows on League started changing pretty significantly is that Kaoms Spirit is essentially done for. Now, you might be familiar with Kaoms Spirit if you've played basically any attack build in the end game of mapping over the last few leagues here. These gloves are absolutely insane right now. Some of the strongest gloves in the game. The reason for this is that this essentially allows you to have 70 to 80% uptime on Berserk and just be able to have this on essentially any build as long as you scale just a little bit of life regen. More attack speed, more movement speed, less damage taken. For 70 or 80% uptime, you can just slap this on left click and just run around with all of these bonuses that typically you're not supposed to have without massive investment. If you've been familiar with early game bow builds, you might know that they use the pretty classic combo of Vol's Vision, Kaoms Spirit, and Immortal Flesh. These 3 items together were essentially enough to be able to run Berserk without anything else. None of these items are hard to get. They're not super crazy rare or anything like that. So you could slap these items on, have Berserk, and just be doing tons of damage moving at light speed with essentially no cost. However, in the next patch, we know that Kaoms Spirit is being changed to regenerate 1 rage per second for every 300 life recovery per second from regeneration. And what this does is that, except in very extreme cases where there are going to be large crazy amounts of life recovery available, these are no longer going to be that good. So when I saw this, I thought, well, we have to replace them with something, and I looked at, just doing normal rare gloves. The first idea that came to mind was using Tanu Ahi. Now, if you're not familiar with these gloves, the reason that you use these is mostly because of the 10% chance to gain adrenaline for 2 seconds when leeches are removed by filling unreserved life. These also provide onslaught, which is decent. They provide attack speed, some physical attack damage leeches life, which isn't very good for most normal bow builds early on, and overall are some pretty solid gloves. However, there's one pretty big issue here. The uptime on these is okay in some cases, but the moment that you put on this jewel, which is very powerful early in league starting if you're really trying to push some currency, the uptime on these gloves goes to essentially nothing. If you get even one modifier that recovers your life even somewhat quickly, the uptime on this just absolutely plummets. So while I think these are okay and you could use them, I honestly don't think this is actually the solution. Now, I looked through every other pair of unique gloves, and honestly, you could probably just use a pair of rare gloves, put some good implicits on them, and be done with it. However, there was one pair of gloves that looked somewhat decent, and that was Shadows and Dust. Now, the main reason that you would use these is because of the Rampage buff. Rampage is a very powerful buff for bow builds, especially ones that are just doing map clearing. This isn't going to really do anything on single target very often, but when it comes to just getting into a map, zooming through, doing as much damage and killing as many things as you can and getting out, Rampage is a really, really powerful buff. Now, if you aren't familiar with what Rampage is, the whole idea behind this is it's just going to give you basically like a kill counter. As you enter the map and as you keep these stacks going, you're going to slowly stack up to a maximum of 1,000 kills. It can go beyond that, but you don't get anything for it. And what this gives you is 1% increased movement speed per 20 Rampage stacks and 2% increased damage per 20 Rampage stacks. So if we do a little math, if you are able to get up to that maximum of 1,000 Rampage stacks, that is 100% increased damage and 50% increased movement speed, which overall is pretty good. These gloves also do provide a little bit of crit multi, and some physical attack damage leeches mana, which doesn't really do very much for us. The Smoke Cloud on Rampage is cool. Unholy Might doesn't do very much for us either, but it's mainly that Rampage buff that we're gaining. The other way that you can think about this, you are essentially gaining back suffixes on your belt and you are gaining a helmet slot. Now you could do a lot of things with a belt and a helmet slot. You're going to be able to get, you know, like Eldritch implicits on your helmet again. You'll be able to have a little bit more resistances on your belt. There's a few different things that you could do. You could even use like some random unique belts if you wanted to and not have to worry about any of that other stuff. So it's not all downsides, but the loss of Berserk is pretty massive here. It will be noticeable until you're able to scale up into very high-end gear. However, there's one other thing that we can do, and that is going to be simply just use a Death Rush early. This ring is really good regardless. If you can get a solid one early in League Start, it'll help you keep that life up, especially with the first change that we talked about, where you're going to be spending a lot of life on Mana Forged Arrows, and this will keep Adrenaline up almost constantly throughout the entirety of the map, and Chaos Resistance is pretty good on this build. And the third thing that is changing is that Tornado Shot now has a significantly lower barrier to entry for early league power. Now, if you are somehow unfamiliar with what is essentially the strongest bow ability in the entirety of the game, the idea behind Tornado Shot is that it has two portions to it. The first is you're going to shoot out these projectiles that you'll see that then explode into a set of secondary projectiles. Now, the key as to why Tornado Shot is so powerful is that the secondary projectiles from each of your primary projectiles can all shotgun the same target. However, it is one secondary projectile per primary projectile. And for people who are aware, you know that the secondary projectile enchantment that was on helmets was insanely impactful because it increased how often you could get that overlap with those secondary projectiles on single target. And in 3.23, those helmet enchants are going away, and Tornado Shot is getting the +1 secondary projectile built into the quality of the gem. So now, realistically, the only barrier to entry to being able to swap off of Lightning Arrow into Tornado Shot is being able to get a 20% quality Tornado Shot gem. In my mind, there is nothing else that prevents you from having an extremely powerful Tornado Shot build, basically in like early red maps if you really wanted to. You need to collect 20 GCP or increase the quality of it on the bench in the lab and you are just good to go. Another reason that this is insane is that the Deadeye Tornado Shot that Rue cooked up that used just some very extremely basic gear like Doomfletch and Ashrend didn't use a helmet because it was using this brutal restraint that gave you, if you don't use a helmet, you get like lucky on your crits and on your hits and such. And now that you just get the additional secondary projectile for free and you don't need the helmet because we weren't going to be wearing one anyways, Tornado Shot's going to be absolutely insane early in the league. Now, you don't even need to go this version by Rue. This requires a brutal restraint, and it hasn't been updated to change out the Kaoms spirit or any of the other stuff for here, because this won't work for a lot of people, say on like day one. However, you can still do it perfectly fine without any of this extra stuff, just running it on an absolutely normal bow build. And there's a pretty big chance that you'll see both myself and quite a few other people swapping to Tornado Shot off of Lightning Arrow, potentially on day one. Now, if you're interested in a League Start guide on Lightning Arrow, I most likely will post what I'm personally going to be doing sometime here in the next week before the league starts, so you can look forward to that. So I hope you guys are excited for Bow League Start, because there's a lot of big changes that are happening, and as much as it blows my mind, I think that bows are getting more accessible and more powerful than they already were before, and I would argue that bows were already the best league starter for the last, I don't even know how long at this point. So remember, boys, if you enjoy this content, make sure to give this video a like, subscribe to the YouTube channel, hit that notification bell to stay up to date with all the latest videos, and stay safe out there in Ray Class. And I'll see you guys in the next video.